All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Q3 Adaptation and Resilience Working Group meeting. Thank you to everybody who's joining us in person and online. We've got a pretty robust agenda today. We'll start with a welcome and some intros. We'll have the Office of Resilience update, which is a standing agenda item for us. We'll have a panel on strategies for resilient coastal living. Then we're going to have a discussion about recommendations. Yes, it is that time of year again that we're preparing our recommendations for the legislature. And then we will have public comment, wrap up the next steps as we normally end these meetings. So to get us started, I'm going to run through roll call, and then we will do approval of the minutes from the May 27th meeting. All right, so starting with Delegate Dana Stein.
Here.
Thank you. Eric Myers.
Present. Thanks.
Thank you. Bob Allen.
Here.
Frederica. That's retired.
We're working on his announcement.
Okay, perfect. Brandy Espinola.
Present.
Thank you. Rachel Lamb. I see Ann Hairston Strang is here.
Yep.
Sarah Bender.
I'm here.
Thank you. Tom Parham. Cliff Mitchell. Debbie Hare Cornwell.
Here.
Nadia Shahab.
Present.
Thank you. Allison Goss is here. Catherine McCall is here. Jen Aoso. John Papavassou. And Taylor Ermer.
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Great. I'm not concerned about a quorum. Thank you all. Okay, so I hope you had a chance to review the minutes from the May 27th meeting. Does anybody have any edits to the meeting minutes or corrections? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. DNR. All right, so we are going to move now to the Office of Resilience update. So I will turn that over to Mike Summer or whoever is online for Resilience Ops.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Kurtz. This is Summer Model Fino speaking from the Maryland Office of Resilience. Today's update is going to be really quick. I will share screen with a couple slides, but there is an upcoming resource that we just wanted to make this group aware of because we haven't shared anything about it with you yet. Let me see. Okay, it looks like I am sharing screen. So first and foremost, I will just give a little background on Maryland Office of Resilience. I know this group, probably just about everyone knows what our office does, but just in case, the office was established by legislation in 2022 and expanded by executive order in 2024 with the intent of serving as the coordinating entity for the state on climate and disaster resilience. So our primary function is coordination across state entities, as well as with our local partners and those outside of government. And another really important piece of what we do, which sort of gets at what I'll be talking about today, is providing local technical assistance. If you've heard from us before, you have probably heard us talking about the Maryland or the Resilient Maryland strategy, which is a statewide strategy that we put out in April. And it looks like my screen is frozen, but y'all can hear me. So I'll just go off camera since you can't see me. But getting into what I really want to tell this group about today, we have a resource guide that'll be coming out hopefully next month. We had hoped it would be out in time to share it with you at this meeting, but definitely don't want to wait until November. This is a guide geared toward local governments about creating resilience authorities. This group probably knows about resilience authorities. I know you have invited the existing resilience authorities to present before, but just as another reminder, resilience authorities are governance entities that local governments can establish that can support various functions of financing and implementing and delivering resilience infrastructure. For those who may be less familiar, our two resilience authorities are the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County and the Resilience Authority of Charles County. And this slide talks a little bit about why resilience authorities matter and why we decided to create this guide in the first place. I think big picture, the challenges that resilience authorities are responding to are things like funding shortfalls, government process delays, silos that can emerge, and capacity gaps, things that we all hear about every single day in doing this work. And resilience authorities can help tap into different types of financing, can help manage and apply for grants, can accelerate project delivery by function of not being government entities themselves, can help break down silos by being able to operate across multiple departments, and can also support longer-term capacity building and planning by having a broader view of resilience project pipelines. So we created this guide to help respond to the biggest questions that we have heard from local jurisdictions that are interested in resilience authorities, but maybe haven't got that far down the path of considering whether it makes sense for them. So the guide is divided into two parts. The first has to do with the mechanics of establishing a resilience authority, understanding how this type of structure may or may not address some of the problems and needs their jurisdiction has, passing the requisite local legislation in order to create it, things like figuring out the governing board, and so on and so forth. And that's where we can draw upon some of the template version of documents from the existing resilience authorities. And part two is more about what happens once you have that authority. What could a bigger picture vision look like? What are some example projects where a resilience authority was able to step in and do something that maybe would have been more challenging to do within the government itself? And we're really, really excited about what this guide will look like. And we can't wait to share it with you hopefully very soon. But I won't give an exact date yet because I know I'll probably be wrong. For stakeholder input, I did want to mention it was important for us to get input from local stakeholders in particular. So our team had 11 interviews. I think that's the final count, although there may have been one or two more wrapping up this week. That included both of the existing resilience authorities, as well as the Montgomery County Green Bank, which is not a resilience authority, but plays a really important function in terms of financing local resilience projects. We also spoke with 3 local stakeholders whose jurisdictions are at various stages of considering resilience authorities. And we spoke with some national resilience experts who have done a little bit of comparison work between Maryland's resilience authority structure and the climate resilience districts that are popping up in California. And the main thing I wanted to share with this group is that we've received really positive response so far about this guide being created. It surprised us even the amount of appetite and interest that people had in this topic. And so we are considering whether it would make sense to even have a convening with a group of locals who are interested in this topic once the guide is launched. So that's all to say that putting this resource out there is an important step, but we're also thinking through how we can help it be used, how we can get live feedback and understand what's useful and what's not, and get a better sense of how these conversations are going to go at the local level. And with that, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer. And I see, thank you for the question in the chat, Jennifer, around, yeah, that's a great question. So that is actually not included within the guide, but I think that's a good note for me to take back around shore erosion control districts as another helpful tool to look at.
Thank you, Summer. Any other questions for Summer?
I just wanted to say, you know, I really appreciate the work and the inquiry and in this kind of model, because we certainly know by looking around that we're going to need some need some different ways of doing business. So I think that we're really pulling all this expertise in from Maryland to help us expand on. You know, we've been working a lot with the Charles Resilience Authority, and just making there's some really neat projects that, you know, they've really helped leverage with that resilience authority.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Appreciate it. We will talk to you again at this time in a few months. So, thank you very much. All right, we are going to move now to a panel on strategies for resilient coastal living. And just as a reminder, this was an item that was submitted last year as a potential recommendation that we incorporated into the work plan for this year. And just wanted to first thank the panelists that are going to be joining us today. I also want to thank the Coastal States Organization who really helped put this panel together. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Natalie Snyder, who is our Watershed and Climate Services Director, who has a lot of experience and knowledge on resilient coastal living. She will also share during the panel.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really connected to this issue. As many of y'all know, I'm from Louisiana, and have worked on this issue in Louisiana for 2 decades. And so where it's really nice is to come into a state where it's not an urgent tomorrow we need to fix it, and we have some time to really develop a state approach and the toolbox that we need to address coastal living in Maryland. So next slide. So when we think about a lot of times we go directly to community-driven relocation. It's what we hear a lot about, but there's a lot of ways that we need to protect in place, whether they're community-wide, traditional, or living shorelines that are protecting communities, or parcel-specific with elevation and floodproofing. These need to be robust tools in our toolbox as we move forward. And then next slide. And then, of course, there is both individual and community-driven relocation, which are separate, have complexity to them, and specifically as we get down to the community-driven relocation. Next slide. And so, as we talked about all of our strategies for resilient coastal living, we felt like it was a magazine that we should produce. And so we kind of had AI develop what would look like our magazine to talk about how we live resiliency. And we have 3 great panelists who are going to be our 3 first journalists to put some content into our magazine. So Devin Demeyer is a coastal resilience specialist with the Maine Coastal Program. And she leads efforts, and I just lost my computer when I to get to the specifics. And it's part of the state's coastal zone master management program. So she works in nature-based strategies, eelgrass restoration, regulatory and permitting reform, and statewide planning for community and habitat resilience. And she leads both the Maine Blue Carbon Network and the Maine Seagrass Consortium. We'll then hear from Alan Shin, who is a flood mitigation specialist at New Jersey DEP Blue Acres program. His work at Blue Acres focuses on helping households in harm's way using equitable strategies to prioritize buyout needs and facilitate relocation, as well as helping communities become more resilient by planning buyouts to optimize contiguous open space for flood storage and potential amenity development. And then Deanna Morin is a Chief Coastal Resilience Officer for the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, where she leads the state's Resilience Coasts initiatives. She is a city planner, attorney, and policy leader with more than a decade of experience in community development, environmental planning, and climate resilience. So the next slide, we're going to turn it over to Devin to kick us off. They're going to each go through a few slides to just give you an idea of their program, what they've been working on, and the successes that they've had within their programs. And then we're going to open it up for questions. So as you're watching me, get your questions ready. Devin, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of the quote unquote program for resilient living in Maine. The kind of TLDR is that there's no one program. It's distributed across many state agencies, many nonprofits, many groups working together. These 4 images that you see on my intro slide here are from storms in December of 2023 and January of 2024. They were monstrous, king tide, astronomical high tides, 4 feet of rain, caused just a crazy amount of damage, and really jump-started the conversation about getting out of harm's way in the state. Next slide. So we have existing frameworks for how we think about resilient coastal living and also how we think about accommodating for sea level rise, accommodating for climate change, and then trying to give communities tools to avoid and retreat as opposed to accommodate and minimize the impacts from coastal hazards. One of them is our state's climate plan, which is Maine Won't Wait, in 2020 and 2024. It's been updated. And we have goals in there to commit to manage 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and almost 4 feet by 2100. And in 2022, all state natural resource agencies, including our Department of Transportation, were required to come to the legislature and present how, through rulemaking, guidance, and other measures, they would be incorporating this commit to manage standard. We also have a large grant that we received, the Climate Resilience Regional Challenge grant from NOAA. We're in year 2 of 5. And there's many different elements of that have proven to be a convener for agencies, nonprofits, and other stakeholders to come together around things like nature-based shoreline stabilization, landscape scale planning for marsh and community resilience, but also this piece called the Regulatory Reform Forum. And it's provided an avenue for our Department of Environmental Protection to work with other state agencies, but also stakeholders on their rulemaking for incorporating climate change, incorporating sea level rise, creating things like districts, creating avenues for our home rule state to adapt to coastal hazards. And so that's been really exciting. This is I'm just going really fast through all this too. I have 5 minutes. We have our Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Committee. This was formed after those crazy storms in 2024 and 2025. And it's a group of state agency experts who are providing recommendations for our working waterfront infrastructure statewide. We now have an advisory council for how to adapt that infrastructure. And there's a lot of conversations about how we move out of the way of hazards while maintaining our water dependent infrastructure, because it's so important for identity and community and economy in Maine. We have a network that's formed just in the past year called the Out of Harm's Way Network that I'll talk about on the next slide. And then we've found some innovative funding pathways through our sections. It's called the Section 309 strategy funding through the Coastal Zone Management Act, and that's run through our Maine Coastal Program. Next slide. So this is just an example of how distributed the strategies for getting out of harm's way and living in a resilient coast is in Maine. These are just some kind of snapshots. So we have a new flood disclosure law that was passed a couple years ago. And now when you're selling or buying property, you have to disclose whether there have been flood impacts and the severity of those flood impacts on that property. And that's a really useful tool. We see real estate agents as a really key stakeholder in our coastal management. We also just last year amended our Natural Resources Protection Act to allow a one-time increase of seawalls to be raised by 2 feet. And this is a whole nother conversation that we can get into about how we maintain and accommodate coastal hazards infrastructure in our coast while still kind of moving backwards and moving away. But we don't have time to get into it. So we have streamlined our permitting processes for nature-based strategies, and that's kind of part and parcel to that conversation about raising seawalls. We want to make it easier for people to do nature-based strategies that also benefit our marshes and tidal flats and eelgrass meadows. In response to those major storms that caused over $90 million in public infrastructure damage a couple of years ago, the governor created a state resilience office, which is now running a Flood Ready Maine program, which is all about delivering better guidance and better tools to communities to adapt to flooding hazards and stormwater controls. And then we have our what's called the Growth Management Law. And this gets at the fact that Maine is a home rule state. So we have many towns and many regions, they govern themselves. We have mandatory baseline standards they have to meet, but they can go above and beyond. And our growth management law is about how these towns do their comprehensive management planning to access funding. And through that, we now have pathways for them to look at sea level rise, to look at climate change impacts. And so that's another kind of distributed strategy at the local scale. Next slide. So this network that's formed is being run by the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is part of the Coastal Zone Management Program. Our short-term goals are just to build a network, to identify the right partners, to find funding, of which we found some innovative pathways through the Coastal Zone Management programs, and then just produce some intermittent materials to kind of keep the momentum alive. Our long-term goals are really to implement a strategy. We don't have a buyout program in our state, but we are running into this issue of private properties being in the way of hazards and not being able to adequately answer the question of who pays for the risk and who pays for the inundation impacts. And our levers are really wide because our stakeholders are very diverse. And so we're talking about rulemaking and legislation, but also state and community planning and outreach. Next slide. Oh, you don't have my last slide. That's all right. The last thing I wanted to talk about was a case study, and it's fine that you can't see it. It's called the Machias Dyke Bridge, and this is a bridge way down east in Maine, over by the border of Canada. It's a massive tidal restriction. It was put in about 150 years ago. And there are all of these goals, right? Conservation groups want to restore tidal flow to the marsh that's behind it. It's a beautiful, large marsh. We're talking carbon sequestration, floodplain, stormwater mitigation. There's also some water quality problems that opening this tidal restriction would support. But there's also 50 property owners upland of that tidal restriction. And so it's taken decades and decades of negotiation with this community to talk about, okay, if we open this up, if we put a span in, we're talking about resilience, in a 100-year timeline, but what about the immediate property impacts? Who's going to pay for that flooding? Who's going to handle those complaints? And how are we going to maximize local self-determination in this process? And it's a great case study to really showcase that getting out of harm's way, it needs to be community-led, and it needs to be about collective values, collective choice, and not just about engineering. Otherwise, when these in our home rule state go to a place where we need to take a town vote, they typically don't pass. And then we've spent all this money and all this engineering and all this hydrology time to get to a point where the community is not interested in anything other than maintaining the status quo. That's my last little piece. Thanks so much for having me here today. There's so much to say, and I'm looking forward to the panel Q&A.
Thank you, Devin, and I appreciate you bringing up Dyke and thinking about how some of these projects induce flooding, and it's not just the natural flooding that's occurring, but how projects are affecting it. So we'll turn over to Alvin in New Jersey.
Hi, can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Good. Hi, I'm Alvin Chin from Blue Acres. Blue Acres is the state's residential property voluntary flood buyout program. We are a bureau of 18 staff, including 8 case managers, 6 outreach and planning staff, 2 field inspectors, and accounting analyst and a boss. That's all of us for the state of New Jersey's buyouts. Let's see. Next slide. Blue Acres has been around since 1996 and completed its first buyout in 1998. Originally, we were a sub-program of Green Acres, which is the state's land acquisition program for state parks, forests, wildlife reserves, and so on. Blue Acres expanded in the years after Irene in 2011 and Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And then after Hurricane Ida in 2021, we were reorganized out of Green Acres and into the Office of Climate Resilience, which had recently been created to reflect the unique needs of residential floodplain acquisition versus acquiring forests or wetlands or farmland. The Office of Climate Resilience, OCR, houses, in addition to Blue Acres itself, the Coastal Management Program for the state, the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, which coordinates the Department of Transportation, Department of Community Affairs, Office of Emergency Management, and other state agencies regarding major projects and policies. OCR also contains the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning and the Resilient New Jersey program for local planning assistance for individual municipalities or multi-municipal regions. OCR also is responsible for creating the New Jersey Climate Change Resilience Strategy, the Coastal Resilience Strategy, the Extreme Heat Action Plan, and other climate-related planning and guidance for state agencies and municipalities and individuals. Next slide. Okay, there's a lot of information on this slide, but let me summarize it. Blue Acres can't do all the parts of a buyout ourselves, so we have collaborators and partners, including municipalities, which we rely on to identify areas of risk and need. They know their communities best, and they refer their residents to us. They also have a major role in post-demolition land use, visioning for that land use, and also for day-to-day land stewardship. Our federal agencies, FEMA, HUD, and USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service provide funding, which is incredibly important when you're buying houses in this day and age. And they also articulate priorities for that funding. And in some cases, they can review open space land use ideas after demolition. Our state agency partners, NJOEM and Department of Community Affairs, those are the grantees for the HUD and FEMA funds. And we work with them to be sure that we are spending those funds efficiently and in alignment with those federal agency priorities. Those DEP, OEM, and Department of Community Affairs also coordinate recovery and mitigation strategies in some communities to avoid checkerboarding, which is a big deal, that especially since we haven't had that level of coordination throughout the history of managed retreat in New Jersey. So this is something of a recent thing. And also we have internal partners within DEP that provide technical and administrative support, including procurement, legal, GIS. We also have a good relationship with New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. They handle, of course, the Section 106 and state equivalent historic preservation reviews, and they help us to mitigate losses of cultural resources when we demolish them. And we also have relations with a couple of NGOs that usually assist during the BAT process with wraparound services, mainly social services and housing-related financial services. But we also have relationships with other NGOs that partner up as the land steward when it's more appropriate for them to oversee the actual land than a local government. Next slide, please. The Blue Acres program is modeled on centering the homeowner. Each homeowner is assigned a case manager who is their only point of contact for their case, and essentially walks them through what can be sometimes an alienating, paperwork-intensive, bureaucratic process. We also have constant outreach to individuals and to communities to encourage them to make hard decisions ahead of time about what they want their communities to look like. We are very proud of having received dedicated state funding for buyouts. This is not for elevations or other flood mitigation strategies, only for land acquisition, of which buyouts count as one. And we are able to use those funds where federal priorities don't quite meet the needs of the community. And we also have good relations with some interest groups and universities that help us with not only technical support and things like outreach, land use visioning, but also such as the Better Buyouts Working Group that allows us to exchange ideas with other buyout practitioners across the country. Our primary goal in this is, of course, to relocate residents out of harm's way, and anything else that we come up with is in service of that goal. Next slide, please. Over 3 decades, we've accumulated a lot of, we've identified a lot of problems, I'd say. Chief among them is high housing costs in the state of New Jersey, not just in the New York metropolitan area, not just in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, but throughout the state. So we are trying to make offers to buyout homeowners that both compel them to accept the offer because it's generous, but not overly generous, so that we have enough funds to meet as much need as we can. Local governments have expressed concern about loss of rateables and the cost of stewarding land, especially in towns that are entirely in floodways or floodplains, and experience a real burden on their municipal services when they have to maintain land, especially if they want a high maintenance regime like regularly mown lawns, for example. Funding is always a challenge. While we do have state corporate business tax revenue that's allocated through the Garden State Preservation Trust, that process does rely on state legislative authorization and governor's signature in addition to the GSPT. And there is federal funding, which depends on presidential disaster declarations, which are not always awarded, especially for lesser disasters or floods. Finally, when we deal with homeowners, every homeowner is going to be different in terms of their individual priorities, their understanding of risk, their financial situation, their familial situation, and connection to place. So this is something that we have become more and more proficient at dealing with, but there's always going to be homeowners who throw you a curveball. Next slide. Finally, I'd just like to illustrate part of the way that of the pace of buyouts. These are coded by the four major funding sources. You can see that the lion's share of buyouts were provided by FEMA after the 2011 Irene and 2012 Sandy federal disaster declarations. We have acquired significant acreage in our town and in our state, and we also have briefly had a program that awarded funding directly to local governments for their own buyouts. But in discussions with them, we suspended that program in part because it was administratively burdensome for the towns to run the buyouts themselves. We have land restoration projects in 10 communities, and we're reaching out to local governments to find if they have the interest in doing that in additional communities, because again, we have buyouts in about 50 towns, cities, boroughs, townships in the state, and we're always looking for them to realize their full potential for not just moving homeowners out of harm's way, but also using the sites as ecological amenities for flood storage and infiltration. Next slide, please. That's my presentation. Here's my contact information if you have follow-up questions, but I expect we'll have more at the panel. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alba. I'm sure we will have more questions. And before we reach that point, we'll turn it over to Deanna with Massachusetts.
Hi, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our state's approach to relocation and buyouts. Similar to Devin's description of Maine's approach, there's no kind of one program in Massachusetts, but a number of interconnected studies and initiatives, a few of which I'm going to talk about today. So just in terms of important context, Massachusetts faces a rapidly growing and expensive flood problem. We have over 1,500 miles of highly developed coastline, and we're one of the most densely populated states in the country. A lot of that population lives on our coast. Next slide. One of the reasons that this conversation is becoming so urgent is the scale. So we are projecting that we're going to see more than 4 feet of sea level rise by 2070, all things kind of business as usual. And that translates into over about $1 billion in annual projected coastal property damage on that same time frame. So that kind of 2070s time frame with 4 feet of sea level rise. We also expect during that same time frame that we may see state assets facing about $52 million a year in coastal flood losses. And if we look out even further to century's end, we are expecting that over 3 million people in the state will live in an area that's exposed to coastal flooding. For reference, there's about 7 million people in Massachusetts right now. The municipalities could lose up to $945 million every year in local revenue. And that's under kind of a 6 feet of sea level rise scenario by end of century. So the fiscal consequences are really significant. I'll also note that a lot of these estimates are based on coastal flooding because that is where we have kind of the best downscale data in Massachusetts. It does not fully account for our growing inland flood risks, which are also significant. So these numbers are really an underestimation. So the question is not whether Massachusetts should protect communities, we absolutely need to, but whether protection, whether it's elevation, rebuilding, are going to be sufficient everywhere, or whether in some places we will need that voluntary pathway to safer ground. Next slide. So this is in no way a new conversation in Massachusetts. We actually first identified officially buyouts as an action for the state to consider in our 2015 Coastal Erosion Commission report. But even prior to that, there was a long history of advocacy and legislation supporting this concept, really dating back as far as like 2008. Most recently, we kind of formalized this action again in our 2023 Resilient Mass Plan. That's our state hazard mitigation adaptation plan that really is kind of the umbrella for all of our climate adaptation and resilience work in the state. And it specifically identified kind of having a study around a state-led acquisition and buyout program. Then in 2024, we had a CZM-funded project that kind of was happening around the same time. We funded NGOs to develop an informal practitioner network and really kind of expand that work statewide to look at proactive relocation. And then in 2025, we put out our Resilient Coast Plan, which was a sub-initiative of Resilient Mass, really specific to our coastal resilience efforts. And that plan also reinforced the need to consider a voluntary buyout program as part of the kind of tools in our toolkit. MEMA, our Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, subsequently launched a 2-year statewide buyout and elevation feasibility study. I'll talk more about that later, but we've already kind of completed phase 1 of that study. And then most recently, and we just announced this about a month ago, CZM is awarded another grant to that relocation network to continue to expand that network statewide. Next slide. So I think one of the really distinctive things about Massachusetts is that, you know, this approach is not being developed by any one department or agency. As I mentioned, MEMA is the state lead on the buyout and elevation program work, but there is a group, there's an interagency, interdepartmental group that is really working with MEMA on that study. CZM is on that list. And so it's a really kind of whole of government approach to studying that as an option. As I mentioned, CZM is leading the broader coastal relocation and resilience coast work, but EEA, our Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, really provides the broader climate resilience framework. And so, yes, we're doing all of this kind of intergovernmental coordination. We're also working with NGO and academic partners on projects like the Proactive Relocation Network, but we're really making an effort to have all of those studies and initiatives and programs be well coordinated and interconnected. And then in terms of success and progress to date, you know, we've made some really tangible progress. We've held 2 statewide practitioner workshops through the statewide relocation network, and we've helped to expand that to over 350 residents at this point, and have been engaged through across more than 20 communities and community organizations. We found that, you know, residents are really much more willing to have these conversations than we initially assumed. And so that's been a really great outcome of the work that we've been doing and the engagement we've been doing. And then importantly, we've been sure to kind of connect that work in with the other work that the state is doing, specifically by creating a pipeline of community input into the MEMA buyout study, which is really all about kind of understanding both the feasibility of establishing a state-led buyout program in Massachusetts, as well as understanding some of the challenges and constraints and considerations, making sure that that's going to be a useful and fair program for our residents. Next slide. So we're really at a transition point right now. Our next step is to move from MEMA's feasibility work toward designing an actual pilot program. MEMA's feasibility work should really give us a pathway toward designing and testing a statewide voluntary buyout and elevation program in the coming years. At the same time, we want to continue our voluntary relocation network and our community engagement around that with communities, but increasingly connect what we're learning from residents and municipalities directly back into that state program design. So making sure that there is that kind of communication pipeline between the two initiatives. And then ultimately, our biggest challenge is that we need a durable funding model. And I don't think that'll be surprising to anyone here that that's our biggest challenge. We need to figure out how to fund implementation at scale. A successful program, needs durable funding that isn't entirely dependent on federal disaster funding or on waiting for a major storm to occur. We want to be proactive. And ultimately, our goal isn't to relocate everyone at risk. It's to make sure that voluntary relocation is a realistic option for the people and the communities that are interested in that and are not interested in continuing to protect, repair, and rebuild because that may no longer make sense for them. Next slide. And that's it for me. So I look forward to the panel conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to all three of you. And so I'm going to open it up to in the room and online for questions. We may have some in the chat, but my computer died, so you don't have to tell me if there are any. That mouse up there. But any questions in the room? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that you have a partner of the Nature Conservancy and a few other things in Massachusetts for the from New Jersey, Maine, and also Massachusetts. Any other partners that our state can look to for some support on this?
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. You're cutting in and out a little bit. I think your question was that the Nature Conservancy is one of the NGO partners on the project. Is the rest of your question, who are the other partners?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so the main partners are the Nature Conservancy, also the Urban Harbors Institute out of UMass Amherst, and then a community-based organization called CREW, which responds to communities responding to extreme weather. Those are really the three kind of prime leading partners, but as I mentioned, they've really been expanding their practitioner network statewide. And so, when you take into consideration those members, we have a really kind of broad cross section of different types of practitioners across academia, environmental groups, community organizations, and others.
Alvin, did you have anything to add to that as far as your partners?
Sure. So with regards to social services, we have drawn upon regional organizations such as faith-based organizations such as Catholic Charities and United Methodists that helped flood survivors connect with social services, whether those were private or governments provided. We also have been connecting with some charitable foundations to assist in providing financial services such as bridge loans that the state is not able or authorized to provide to buyout participants. This is still a very early stages of the process, but when it comes to managed retreat and a home being someone's biggest investment or asset, financial assistance is critical. Financial advice, housing counseling is critical as well. So some of those social services may include housing counseling as well. Our partners in land conservation include the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, the Watershed Institute, and the Land Conservancy of New Jersey. And they're primarily focused on preserving and using land for educational and ecological conservation purposes.
Kevin, anything to add, or we want to? Okay, can we move on. Other questions? We can go to the chat. This question is for Alvin. Is post buyout land restoration funded by the state too, or through partnership? Also, who owns the land, state or local government?
That's a good question. I think I briefly mentioned that we had a local assistance program where we gave money to local governments between 2012 and 2019. That program suspended, but buyouts from that program resulted in local governments owning the land and only having to comply with open space land use restrictions, as in you can't sell the land to a developer. You have to use it for recreation and conservation. For the about 1,200 state-owned buyouts, the state owns the land, but the DEP's legal office creates a management agreement for the local governments so that the local governments understand what they have to do and what they may do with the land. In some cases, that has included restoration. In some cases, it has involved fencing it off or letting it grow completely overgrown, depending again on the local government's extent of buyouts in their jurisdiction and their willingness to expend funds on it. The restoration can come from grants that are sought by the state or by the local government. But in general, the state buyout funds are for land acquisition and not necessarily for larger restoration projects beyond the immediate site stabilization after demolition. And as for federal funds, the same thing generally applies. That funds the acquisition and the demolition and site stabilization, but not long-term restoration projects. I will say that the NRCS has been a great partner because their grant programs explicitly include restoration funding, and that federal funding is not reliant on a presidential declaration.
Thanks. And I think there's another tag onto that one, but I think you've answered it. I think maybe one of the key pieces of this follow-up about coordinating restoration and landscaping efforts across multiple post buyout parcels. And can you talk a little bit about how Blue Acres may target whole areas as opposed to individual volunteers and for flood protection?
Sure. I've just pasted a link to a Blue Acres webpage that has an illustration of a 2012 versus 2025 pre-buyout versus post-restoration area. This is an area that was about 150 parcels in an area that was fairly badly hit by a surge from Hurricane Sandy. While there are some holdouts who were absolutely not interested in a buyout, this is an example of using existing topography and surface waters and planning around where there are continued residential uses, looking for places to save long-term costs, like in vacating sections of publicly maintained roadway and giving them back to nature, so to speak. This was actually funded by one of those aforementioned grants that was sought by the local government with assistance from Rutgers University. We did receive a NOAA NIFWIF, I believe, grant to restore this area to provide both habitat and recreational amenity. And we also have, related to this, a flood resilient landscapes guidance document, also created by a Rutgers professor to encourage other local governments to plan out in this way. You have perhaps one parcel, or you have 50 parcels or 100 parcels. What is the appropriate scale for visioning, for restoration, and so forth?
Great, thank you.
I have a question about whether you're using special taxing districts in your states at all, where there's a community, perhaps an HOA, that has a shoreline restoration project that they want to do, but they don't have all the money up at once. So you give them the money in maybe a zero interest loan, but then they pay it back over a period of time in higher taxes. This seems like a good way to bring other people's money forward to do the shoreline restoration. And it's something that we're doing in Maryland to a small extent, but it could be potentially even more important in the future. I'm wondering if any of your states are using special taxing districts to help pay for shoreline restoration. And if so, what lessons you're getting from that?
Oh, sorry, Deanna, did you want to take that?
No, I was just gonna say, if I can say for Massachusetts, no, we're not exactly doing that. We are investigating, the various funding and financing options that might be available to us. And we put out a financing strategy last year. I can put a link to that in the chat. One of the concepts from that document, which we are actively trying to move forward through legislation, is similar, but not exactly what you're describing, but it is a resilience revolving loan fund. And the idea is that we would use that revolving loan fund to provide flexible capital to our municipalities to get them going on big, priority regional projects. And so that's not officially stood up yet. We need the legislature to move it forward. We introduced legislation on that about almost 2 years ago now. And we're, hopeful that we'll have an opportunity to work on that. So it not exactly what you're describing, but we're certainly looking at other options of how to fund and finance these initiatives as well.
And Maine doesn't have anything like specific to that for restoration, but we do have municipal tax increment financing. And that's through our Department of Economic and Community Development. And you're actually giving me ideas that I should take back to our network about ways to fund these projects. We haven't actually thought about our tax increment financing projects and programs, but it provides funding to municipalities for public use projects, and so it's a good avenue to explore. Thank you. Sorry, I don't have a better answer, but thank you.
Deanna, do you have any leads or ideas on your durable funding model? Is that starting to shape up, or is it still in the works?
Yeah, like I said, we are looking, beyond just the set of initiatives for standing up durable funding for climate resilience more broadly. A lot of that is being done through our resilient finance strategy. I did put a link to that in the chat. That's being led by our Resilient Mass team. We're still kind of kicking the tires on all the options that are out there. I think, it is, I think the one thing that we have acknowledged is there's no universe where the state can fully take on the burden of cost for what needs to be done, not just on our coast, but across the state to make our communities more resilient. It has to be a partnership between the state, the local governments, the private sector, and ideally the federal government. It's definitely been a hit to not have as much access to federal funds for some of these projects. And, we hope that will be part of the capital stack in the future. I think it has to be. And, in the meantime, we're trying to figure out, what of this the state can take on and what that'll look like. But, we're really feeling excited about the idea of this resilience revolving loan fund. We have a lot of interest and momentum around that idea. So we're hoping that we'll get to move that forward in the near future.
Great, thanks. Devin, in the chat, there's a question about you mentioning finding unique ways to use Section 309 funds. And can you elaborate on that, of what you're doing?
Oh yeah, so that was pretty straightforward. So every 5 years, we update our strategic outlook for the coastal zone management for NOAA's Office of Coastal Management. This past round, which we were up, I think last year, we just wrote in an entire strategy related to getting out of harm's way. Maine is unique in its use of our 309 strategies. We're different from a lot of other states that write them, like for example, New Hampshire writes them as literally a program that they will implement all of these milestones under. Maine writes our 309 strategies as a blueprint, but more so like a menu of activities, and we can pick and choose from those which we want to implement, and it allows us to get more things approved by NOAA in advance, and then be able to work on them as they come up. And that's been really helpful for Out of Harm's Way, because this work is obviously driven by community conversations. We don't want to promise legislative action. We don't want to promise rulemaking. But we wrote in an entire strategy from establishing a network to outreach events and community conversations, writing white papers, doing the necessary legwork, all the way down to fully funding and establishing a buyout program or a similar structure for implementing some kind of out of harm's way strategy. But we're not on the hook for delivering all of it. It just allows us a pathway to fund it. And so because we wrote our strategies this way, we've been able to offer our network financing for various activities, which right now includes setting up the network, having convenings, and then doing a policy analysis across states for other out of harm's way strategies that we could be considering for Maine. So it should be online publicly. And I'm sure if Vidya is not here, she can share, but I'm happy I'll put my email in the chat. If anybody wants to, see our strategy for out of harm's way that we wrote into our strategic outlook, I'm happy to share, but it should be available online.
Okay, great. I do want to have a question for all of y'all. You mentioned the community engagement. I think that's just such an essential piece of this. And for those who were on this CoSmart call earlier today, we talked about how Maryland, and I think a lot of y'all, are kind of experiencing this slow moving disaster. And Alvin talked to, like, when a disaster hits, you get a lot of money and you get a lot of interest, but then when it's the slow moving disaster and you're looking forward to the sea level rise, and what Deanna showed as far as like this outlook of having, millions of dollars of properties in harm's way. How have you been setting up your community conversations, and what are the things you're hearing from communities? What are the biggest challenges you're seeing within the community engagement? And I'll start with Devin.
So I think similar to a lot of other coastal states, there's differences in the composition of communities that live in our coast. There are kind of like very wealthy second home owners who are buying these properties even after they're condemned, knowing that they're willing to pay for the impacts. And then we have very, very low income communities who don't have the financing to adapt and can't move for various reasons, but also because they've been there for 6 generations and they make money off of their public intertidal access right where they're at. So I think the biggest challenge for us has been it's really been who pays for the impacts. So right now, Maine is trying to open up a lot of title restrictions, and this is a good example of a getting out of harm's way kind of challenging community conversation. We know that this needs to happen. We know that our marshes need to migrate. We've done the tools, we've done the decision support tools to support that thinking. But by the same token, we have communities that might not be ready for that to happen. And there's history in our state of title restrictions just being opened without talking to the community. And then, farmers and legacy property owners losing access to hay fields, losing access to grazing fields. And so there's a tension between kind of like historical preservation and private property, and then what we know is happening, which is a coastal shift, right? Like a move of our highest astronomical tide lines, a move of our flood zones. And so just trying to have those critical conversations where we align values and find shared values has been difficult. And in some situations, you know, we keep coming down on the side of like, leave the infrastructure there and we'll wait for it to kind of fall into the ocean, or we'll pay for the replacements. We have 3 projects that, just off the top of my head, in the past, you know, couple months, it's been, you know, like we're not ready for this road to be made into a span during in and you know, no matter how many conversations you've had, flood impacts, this is over time, this is going to be better because we'll have sediment accumulation. When you're met with the long-term resilience benefits versus like immediate impacts to private property, especially low income, legacy, generational homeowners, those are really difficult and challenging conversations that we have not sorted.
Great. Deanna, do you have some feedback from us?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Devin has said. I don't want to be too repetitive. I think for us, you know, one of our biggest takeaways in the engagement that we've done is just the willingness to talk about this as an option. And, you know, residents were far more willing to talk about it than we had expected. Some of that might be self-selection of, you know, who comes to the meetings. But, you know, there were a lot of questions about, you know, whether we should less questions about whether we should discuss this more and consider this more as an option, and more about like, how is it going to work? Like, is there going to be fair compensation? Where would people go? How are they going to stay connected to their community? How are we going to protect renters and more vulnerable households? So I think people are just really eager for like the details and nuts and bolts of how something like this would work, but very willing to have the conversation. I think people also, you know, liked knowing and wanted it reaffirmed that this is one option in a broader resilience toolkit. Like, this may not be the answer everywhere, that it, you know, is going to be part of a larger strategy, and that it can ultimately help serve the community, you know, where it's happening, right? Like, we want acquired land to provide some type of community benefit afterward, whether it's open space or habitat or just the flood protection. So I think, you know, we've had a relatively positive, you know, experience in doing community engagement and in the conversations we've been having with residents. But, you know, I think people are really eager to kind of understand the details of how this would work. And, you know, so that's something that we've really been trying to bring to the table.
Alvin.
Let's see, I'm going to put a link into the chat that, again, this is not a Blue Acres effort specifically, but it is from OCR that that illustrates the communities and regions that we've reached out to, saying, hey, you have climate risk. How do you want to handle that? And we've had generally very good good engagement. However, this is also something where the towns do come to us and request this assistance. It also helps that the state of New Jersey requires, as part of the mandatory master plan every 10 years, to have a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment and build out analysis in it. So towns that are thinking, how do I meet these obligations and mandates imposed by the state, if they can get that financial and technical assistance, they're probably already going to be, they're predisposed to be receptive. So is another way of putting it. And so we do have support from local governments and from residents. However, where it becomes tricky is what mitigation strategies they decide on. Certainly in municipalities that are different in terms of their geography and landscape, as well as their socioeconomic status, there are going to be some people who say our first priority should be armoring the beach because I have a very expensive home there. And other people in riparian areas further inland will say, hey, I don't want my the municipal resources to fund that. Let's talk about elevating my home that's in a very close to a wetland or a developed wetland, I should say. So those decisions are still up to the local governments, and the Resilient New Jersey program is still young enough that we're waiting to see some of the implementation from these plans. I will say that Blue Acres' role in this has been to listen to local governments identify areas of concern related to Blue Acres buyout clusters or projects. And if they say, we want more of this, then we'll say, okay, we can do our best to engage the homeowners in this neighborhood, this community. But sometimes homeowners and local governments say, we don't think that buyouts should be continued. And in some cases, Blue Acres here understands that they've reached their tolerance for managed retreat at this time, especially due to things like ratables loss and land management.
Great, thank you. And I think a couple of questions came in the chat related to this topic. So has anyone on the panel leveraged leasebacks to help ease the tension between the residents? Or considered that at least?
Blue Acres requires, and Blue Acres and Green Acres are required by state law to acquire lands for recreation and conservation purposes, and continued human occupancy is not part of that. There is currently a bill in the legislature that would allow us to use leasebacks and life estates and other innovations, but I don't know if it will pass, and I don't think we have a agency-based policy solution, given that the restriction is in state law.
Okay, yeah, we'll keep an eye on that legislation. Anyone else?
Maine has not, to my knowledge.
Okay, something to keep an eye on. New Jersey leads the way. And then the other question, and I think this goes to the most complex of these topics, which is community-driven relocation. And the question is about engaging with potential receiving communities, but I'm also curious to add to that, have y'all identified communities that would need to leave as a community as opposed to voluntary individual buyouts?
I mean, this is something that Maine is very conscious of because a lot of our coastline, especially as you get further away from New Hampshire and move further down east, as we call it, community structure becomes far more tight knit, and it's a lot of it is built around our working waterfronts and our working waterfront communities. Piers and wharves being used by multiple families to haul out traps and support their businesses. And, that's an agreement that goes back generations. So for us, much of the community relocation would probably need to happen on a not parcel by parcel basis as you go further down east and get into more fishing communities. But again, we're not at a place where we even have a buyout program yet for our state. And so these are like all things that we're thinking about as we kind of strategize what that's going to look like. And then we also have tribal communities that exist directly on the coast. And one notable one is our Passamaquoddy tribe at the Sabayak Pleasant Point Reservation down in Cobscook Bay, which is like directly next to Canada. So it's very far down east. And, this is a place, this is a community that would definitely need to relocate as a unit.
Others have thoughts on that question? Jennifer, I think you had. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say that it helps to get buy-in at the community level when you already have an existing neighborhood fabric, which is present in some communities and less so in others. Going back to the Woodbridge example, where I shared the before and after link to the image to the multi-parcel land restoration, we had a resident in that neighborhood who was a community organizer, which is very useful for getting community buy-in. And she started a blog about living in a flood zone and waiting for a buyout. And I'll have to dig up the link to that. But she was able to snowball recruit her neighbors so that we could get those hundreds of buyouts. And that degree of neighborhood connection is less common in my recent experience than it was a decade and a half ago. I will share, however, two examples of very small buyout clusters where homeowners applied as a group to Blue Acres and essentially said, if we ask for a buyout as a group, then the state will have to notice us. So in that sense, they'd already decided that a buyout was their best choice, at least for their immediate neighborhood, and said, okay, how do we leverage that for state attention? And this is ground up driven rather than other top down attempts like enforcing substantial damage restrictions or imposing a disaster risk reduction area.
A couple more questions. Is there any concerns that a voluntary approach will lead to fewer resources? Sorry, I skipped Jennifer, I'll go back to you. To maintain existing infrastructure, leading to stranded assets or possibly concerns with regulatory takings? And how are local governments getting guidance to balance these concerns? Are y'all thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I'll say definitely something that we're thinking about, because we're thinking about voluntary buyouts. We know that can create a checkerboard pattern where, some homes are removed, other communities remain and need to kind of maintain roads and utilities and emergency access. That's one of the key challenges that we identified in our feasibility study for the program. And part of, the recommendation on that is to prioritize clustered acquisitions where we can, to try and kind of help avoid that problem as much as possible. This also, I think, just kind of speaks to a bigger issue that is like a phased adaptation planning issue, like whether we're talking about voluntary relocation of residential properties or anything else, like the sequencing of when we do what and how it has an impact on the rest of the community is a bigger issue that we, to some extent, tried to tackle in our Resilient Coast plan. I'll put a link to that in the chat. There's a really interesting chapter in the Resilient Coast plan where we have some renderings where we go through like some hypothetical phasing of adaptation measures. And we talk about like, okay, if you have an area where you can do a clustered acquisition, like does the relocation of the road happen before or after? And like, how do you kind of sequence all of those things and what are the trade-offs? So I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think it's going to be different for every community, but it has to be kind of part of the overall planning conversation for that community or that neighborhood or whoever. But I think it's a much broader issue than just, talking about residential properties being bought out.
Yeah, great. Jennifer, sorry.
That's okay. These problems are so universal. People in coastal communities everywhere around the world are dealing with them. I'm wondering if you are putting best practices into AI to teach these language models best practices, and are you taking some of the plans that different communities are given to you and comparing them using AI on as to how those plans are and whether AI is helpful to you or not in what is very difficult work for which there never seems to be enough people or time to deal with it?
I've not personally used AI to do comparative analysis of different plans. Our state has very strict AI policies, and there's a real mindfulness in our climate resilience networks and communities about using AI as little as possible until its water resource management issues can be resolved.
I agree with that.
Like similar. All right, so I want to thank our panelists for being here. Please give them a round of applause. I also appreciate that you are a resource that some of us can reach out to in the future. You know, as we continue to share what we're doing in different states, learning from each other is really important. So with that, you're welcome to stay on and hear about what recommendations we're gonna make as a team to work on, or we're happy to let you go to your day jobs. And I'll turn it back to John.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you very much to the panelists. I think really appreciate your time and helping us continue to think through this. All right, we are going to turn our attention now to the recommendation discussion, and just so to remind everybody, what we would be doing here is coming up with the recommendations we as the Adaptation work group would want to make to the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. They would then evaluate those recommendations and potentially include them in their final report that goes to the legislature at the end of every year. And so I really want to thank everybody who put some ideas into the Google form. There will also be an opportunity if there may be things that came up today that you'd like to talk about. And just also a reminder that we've got several pathways for moving this work forward, whether through recommendations to the ARWG, as well as adding it to the work, for the MCC, yes, and then adding it to the work plan for the ARWG. I'm just trying to get every acronym in that I can possibly do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryland to lead us through this discussion. And yes, please give us any ideas you have.
Okay, we are going to start with the ones that were submitted ahead of time, but I am hopeful that we will have time for any that may have inspired you last minute as well. I also want to make a specific call out to our ARWG members who are going to be the ones that are officially voting, which we will be moving forward. You have an email from me in your inbox telling you that this is going to be a tight timeline for voting because they are going to be considered at the upcoming September 14th meeting, and the commission likes to send those to commissioners a week in advance. So we are going to give you just a handful of days to vote after hearing the discussion here. So it's going to move fast. All right, so we had 6 that were submitted in advance, and I will zoom in because I know absolutely no one can read those. So I'm going to just start in the order that they were submitted, and I also did happen to see Cliff. She's tiny, hopped off. Yep, even more. He submitted this one, which is piloting a test of climate and health data as part of the climate and health profile report. In one or more jurisdictions using real world adaptation or climate relevant decisions or activities. And as a reminder for the group, we are moving forward on a previous recommendation that is also in the Next Generation Adaptation Plan on updating the 2016 Climate and Health Profile Report. And so this would kind of be a next step to that. Cliff, did you want to expand on this?
No, thanks, Ryland. Apologies for being late, but yeah, the idea is that as we move forward with the update to the Climate and Health Profile Report, one of the things that we heard from our kickoff meeting in no uncertain terms, in fact, it was probably the first 3 or 4 priority recommendations, was that the people wanted the report to be actionable, relevant, usable. There was a huge emphasis on communications and translation of health data into applicable decision-making. So with that in mind, one of the things that I would like to be able to do is to be able to use the Climate and Health Profile Report and the development of the report to essentially pilot test it in real time and use that experience to help inform the structure of the final update by essentially using the case study or examples that are developed here as a combination of teaching tool, but also structural elements for the way the data are presented in the update itself.
Now, one of the things that we'll need to do to get it in the format required for the commission is have the person who is being charged with this action, is this going to be an MTH should style action or somebody else?
I'm thinking that the group that is helping to coordinate, MDH is obviously the lead on the climate and health profile report. I think the question is, and I don't know the answer, I'm not really punting here, but I don't want to speak for MDE or DNR, obviously, in the fact that the three of us have been helping to coordinate the development of the profile report. And so I would say that certainly those three agencies, or the people who are working on the report from those three agencies, will have strong feelings about this. I should be a little tactful and cognizant of my own leadership to say that I'll have to ask them to be sure that we will be the lead.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments on this or questions for Cliff? Okay, Cliff, if you could maybe help me get that into the proper format. When I send out the form tomorrow to members so that they can vote, maybe we'll have it in a little bit more ready to go shape
Yep.
to be voted on.
Happy to do that, Marilyn.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to number 2, which is sort of a tag on to the conversation that we just had, but also sort of a larger question on relocation as it relates to septic systems in the face of increasing flooding and sea level rise. It is noting the potential creation of a working group to better explore this concept. And it's a challenge for everyone, as we could see, I think, in this call as well, with a timeline of the fall 2027 meeting or spring 2028 meeting. So I think this is one that could be a recommendation and could also potentially be a work plan item as well. Did anyone want to speak more on it? I'm going to keep these anonymous unless the person wishes to identify themselves, by the way. So if the person would like to speak up about this, they may, or we can discuss it anonymous.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jack Lansing. I'm covering the high school mayor, MGE. I kind of wanted to manage the recommendation a little bit, so I can read it real quick.
Yep.
So MGE or DNR should establish a multi-agency working group, including Maryland Planning, UMSEC, UMD, local health departments, local governments, and other relevant partners to build on existing research and evaluate the vulnerability of private wells and septic systems, including pits with a burn infiltration pond, flooding, rising groundwater, sea level rise, and saltwater intrusion. The group should identify remaining data and policy gaps and recommend practical adaptation strategy and any additional research needed with findings presented by the fall of 2027 or spring 2028. There is already some work underway with the Department of Planning with sea level rise and saltwater intrusion, and the University of Maryland is doing some work, but more focused on the private wells component, not so much with the septic system vulnerability. So if we can convene a working group with all the relevant stakeholders outside of the broad goals of this working group, that way we could, in terms of studying and identifying any gaps, so that we can work further, particularly when it comes to rural and agricultural areas where, to replace those systems with, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which obviously is very difficult to do and to pursue. to find the focus on the applications, and see if we could come up with ideas or concepts that can eventually roll over into potential legislation that is inclusive. So the second piece is really where MDE priority lies. So I just want to emphasize that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, yeah, so we have a potential amendment to the recommendation that kind of builds on previous work, which is the key component here, involves some other stakeholders that have been working in this arena already in maybe the private well, and adds that septic component. And, you know, with the goal of potential maybe legislation, we'll see what comes out of it. But yeah, I like that idea of the building on the past work, I think is key. Yes.
It's not necessarily, hi, I'm Kate, unaffiliated with the ARWG, but I, not necessarily changing the wording of the recommendation, but I think kind of building on what you just said too, and thinking of the presentation earlier. Part of this conversation, I think, will benefit too of thinking of like just the isolation topic that was covered earlier, inundation versus isolation. And if you have like properties being converted back to natural areas or buyouts or things like that, what's happening to septics and well systems, but also like the roadways that are left behind, and how do you maintain those or prioritize them or make those more resilient or less resilient? And I think this kind of can connect to that issue of isolation as well. And not just looking at like those at that individual property level, but at kind of like this greater holistic system of what's vulnerable and what are the other community impacts of that being vulnerable.
Any other comments on this potential recommendation? Okay, I will then move forward with that amendment that you proposed, since it seems that we're all amenable to that, and that puts it in the format required for the commission. And then we could also expand on some of the isolation components in the background info section. We'll have the, as a reminder, recommendation text, and then it does have background information that you can provide for context to further support what the recommendation is coming from. All right, so our third recommendation idea is a bit of a long one. It does come from within DNR and relates to work that's happening from the Roots for Resilience program. It is developing a guide for the state of Maryland, a comprehensive suite of adaptable design options that enable inland wetland migration. This is something that is directly kind of coming out of that work that they're already doing. So it's kind of a logical next step for them, and is kind of something that we've already been talking about. We had a wetland adaptation discussion last year, 2 years ago, who knows now, but previously at ARWG. And so this would be also a continuation of that and the developing of kind of a playbook here. Any thoughts or comments on that?
That's a clarifying question. There's another adaptation guidebook playbook on the nature-based solution side, and I'm wondering if those two efforts are connected or if there's an opportunity to do that in this recommendation.
Does anyone who is familiar with this effort want to speak up about it? I don't know if the person who submitted it is on the call, so. So I don't think they're here, but I think that's a good flag that there may be some alignment that's needed, especially since that has been a long time coming, and this could be potentially duplicative of some parts of that. So I can flag for you who that was.
Okay,
Internally,
yeah, we're glad to work.
Yeah. Okay. So this, I'm gonna move it down to the. This is a recommendation that was from a DNR as well. And so this is more about collaboratively developed climate financing feasibility study to develop a roadmap for the implementation of climate adaptation actions. So the long and short of it is it's feasibility study to study resilience financing. There is potentially another commission recommendation that is going to be put forward, similar but different, on climate financing more broadly. And I do think that in the past week, we had discussions with MDE and saw a little bit of alignment with this recommendation and that recommendation. So although this was submitted here, there is potential that this would be combined with a larger commission recommendation on climate financing broadly to include resilience financing, of course, as a component of that. But in the interest of combining it and making sure we have the group input, does anyone have any thoughts on a resilience financing recommendation, maybe components you would like to see in there, or any questions about that?
I think in the chat, there was a recommendation from Jennifer that might actually fit within the, what your thought.
I wasn't looking.
Yes. But I don't know that. So the governor really does not like studies. And he made that very clear repeatedly in the press and in other instances. And so I don't know that we need another study as much as we can take some of the working, functioning things that are already happening. And I do think that special taxing districts and shore erosion control districts are working. And so I was going to suggest that we dramatically expand those to bring in more public private money to shoreline and other resilience projects.
Okay, so less of dealing with this recommendation, more of your own financing sort of idea that you're spending.
Right, but I'm all about finding money. I'm just concerned because the governor has been so public about not wanting any more studies.
Yeah, I agree.
We have some relatively recent legislation that expanded water authority, but some very different financing. Just can advance examples of that might have been useful. Just so more of a learning and communications effort rather than maybe calling it a study in response. Just, yeah, and it's like who's the audience, and maybe we tie it to the resilience authority efforts that we were talking about earlier, where it's like the counties are up against trying to get the needs. They've got some real problems that they have to deal with day to day, and it's like how do you frame it in a way that makes it clear that you're going to end up with information from this that's going to give them practical solutions. Just tie it with the resilience authority. Them co-develop some of the needs.
Cliff, I saw your hands up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there any thought to how this would either complement or compete with or be understood in the context of the controller's current work on looking at the economic consequences of climate change? Is it clear how this would be different than that? And what the confusion might be if this were to be a recommendation?
I can answer that for the comptroller's office. We're looking at the costs associated, not how to pay for them. So this is absolutely necessary. And we could get rid of the word study and just say, the state will do this.
Yeah, and I think just from internal, like some of the work we were already doing here, this is about, can we get $1 billion bond? Like what are the intricacies of getting that kind of financing? It's not a study in the sense of like some big conceptual thing. We're trying to get down in the weeds of like, how do we do it?
That's helpful. Thank you.
Randy?
I got my recommendations in, hello?
Yeah.
Sorry, I got my recommendations in late yesterday, but the one that I put in, I don't know if you saw it, Ryland, I think it would fit into this. It was about trying to figure out how the state can better finance resilience at scale. And it talked about potentially exploring things like expanding our green bank into a larger climate resilience infrastructure bank, or thinking about like setting up a SRF, but for climate resilience. So that probably could be part of the strategy we're looking at now.
Can you drop that in the chat?
That's
Um,
number 7. Brandy, is this the one you're referring to?
Yep, I think 7 can be nested within the one that you're looking at now, Ryland.
Sorry for the interruption. I just didn't want us to move on from this recommendation. TNC is doing some work to study this already. I have a draft in my inbox. It'll be ready in a few weeks. So if it's helpful, we can get us started on figuring out how to pay for the pipeline of projects. I think that is really important to talk about. We've been working with the Montgomery County Green Bank and discussing various options to structure deals, where state and federal funding might be available, but just to really reinforce that we have to work through different options of getting to a place where the state has sustainable financing resources for any ideas that may come up. And we're happy to share any information that we create. We've been working with an economist and are hoping to run a poll either this year or next year to try and learn about just what constituents think of these ideas and where residents are in terms of being able to either, I don't know what the mechanism will be, but if it's a bond or diverting funding from another source, how each of these messages would land. So just really happy to share any of those with all of you and find those partnerships, but would love to see this continue as part of the working group.
Okay, and so just to be clear, are you saying that you maybe think you have like the first step of this covered and we should go further than that?
I think we should go further than that. We should all look at the first step and see how it lands with everyone. We are working with some experts just in-house to do some of this research and analysis. It's not shareable today, but it will be, I'm hoping within the next month, ready to be shared with the group and we can discuss what comes of it, what the next steps should be. Definitely want to make it something that everyone can provide input on, and it's not a one person decides what the pathway should be. That's not the intention, but for that, I haven't talked to anyone about it yet because it's not totally cooked. So just letting you all know we've been working on it.
Okay, that's great. And I think that's also something that's important to include in that background context section, so we can reference work that it's building on, you know, and show them it's not starting from scratch.
Yes, and there is a publicly launched now pilot program with the Montgomery County Green Bank, where we are actively looking for 3 to 4 municipalities in the state to work with us to go through this process, where it's something modeled after what Massachusetts has done and Rhode Island has done. So the results of that should also, at least the preliminary ones, should be ready next year or early next year, the next ARWG meeting, so we can complete the things.
Very cool. Okay, thank you for sharing. Okay, so I hear we have a potential, lots of merging of ideas and starting points to jump off of. And that being said, I will also take that information back to the potential one that this is already going to be merged with and see if we have actually 2 divergent ideas here, if they are. Yeah, Mike.
Hey, sorry, Rylan. I just want to also chime in on this. I don't see, I'm sorry, I'm just looking over the call attendees right now. So I don't see Rachel in here. I also just want to talk about on the financing side for MDE, they have the climate finance landscape assessment that's already underway with Rachel Lamb and MDE there, which I know she's kind of far down the lane with that. Also, we have our funding table work that we're doing specific to resilience projects throughout the state, which we're starting like actually Friday of this week, starting to have our meetings regarding the setup of that funding table. So I just want to make sure that we're not putting the cart before the horse. By that I just mean, I think we have a lot of stuff happening in this arena. I don't know, but definitely don't necessarily know that we need a study, as was already stated, but I would also say that, you know, there's a lot happening here. I don't know that we want to make a recommendation before we are fully aware of all the things that are going on, because I feel like there's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff on this one.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of work happening.
So is the recommendation to coordinate in advance the climate financing efforts?
I think that there is
some sort of working group on.
Oh, not another working.
No, not another working group, but I'm saying like, if MDM's doing things, MDE doing things, Concord doing, DNR doing things,
I
TNC doing
believe
things.
the individual recommendation does suggest a climate financing working group. So I believe that is the direction that the recommendation, the broader recommendation that we were going to merge this with is going. So if we like that idea of a working group that references, and we can point to all these sources that we just mentioned, then
It does need to be a little more. right?
yeah, it sounds like a merge is warranted and
As long as
making
the
sure.
civilian doesn't get overrun by mitigation.
Yes, the key is, yes, resilience needs to be a component and not just greenhouse gas mitigation. Yeah. Okay,
Equal component.
so it sounds like those are.
Okay, just saying it.
The wishes of the group, and I will relay that to the commission to see what we can do in terms of wording, before it hits the floor. Okay. Any more pieces to say on financing before I move on? I know we got a lot to say, but. Now we're moving to one I think that Anne would be okay with not being anonymous on, because everyone's gonna know it's her anyways. So related to woody biomass, you want to explain it yourself?
Well, it's not just woody biomass, it includes woody biomass. This is something where we're just trying to put a recommendation out there that will make practical advances over the next year or two, to really look at, wood as part of the climate advances and building local jobs. So it's building on a recent governor's executive order, looking at the use of Maryland grown wood species in our state funded procurement. We're really looking to advance the use of wood where it's an appropriate use and builds interest in our forests, and the carbon sequestration that's associated with that. And it would also support like the next generation adaptation plan goals, where we have specific things about resource-based industry. And so this is just looking to build that local adaptation network. It's going to build jobs, going to help carbon and resilience. And so it's asking for at least 3 demonstration projects for wood utilization, and that displace materials, high and embodied carbons, and supports jobs in Maryland. I also have a recommendation in here that I need to get some feedback from MDM on and integrating the wood recovery and use in disaster mitigation and resilience planning. So we had a great tour last week, a place that is really trying to redefine some of our local wood marketing and, market some of our new high performance products that I think could be really innovative. We'd love to have this be a place where we could advance some of this, change of how we do business using our local forest products.
Any questions or comments for Anne?
And Mike, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but it was, you were part of the tour, interested in any reaction on whether you would want something like integrate wood recovery and use in disaster mitigation and resilience planning by 2029, whether that's something that you would want us to be coordinating with or not.
Yeah, we'd have to speak with the secretary before we did any wording like that. But I would say that in general, of the things we discussed, we would probably have some interest in figuring out how we could work that into our processes. So I'd have to circle back with you on that. Unfortunately, he's out this week, but we could definitely circle back with you on that. I would think that we would have the most interest probably around, while we were there, we were discussing how we could integrate it into state and or regional financing mechanisms or contracting mechanisms for locals to use in responding to various disasters. And I think that's probably a pretty quick and simple way to integrate them into that process in a way that they're currently not, and would be pretty helpful, I think, on their end.
Okay, I would accept that as a friendly modification. So we're to focus on opportunities that save money I mean, that's one of the where, we see other parts of the world, other parts of the country, having locally generated fuel that has substantial, stable cost savings from these, you use it where it's a fit for the system. And we're looking for cost savings, the environmental benefits, Maryland jobs, looking at like sustainability. We really have to be looking at what is our waste products, how can we repurpose those to value, like just really getting sustainability. And when we harvest a tree, that we get to use the whole tree, that we're not just diverting those into landfills and generating uncontrolled emissions that aren't going to help any of the economic or the environmental processes. And the reason the Maryland Forest Service keeps bringing this up is because it's a really big deal for forest health and sustainable forest management. If we want diverse, native habitats to be, remaining on Maryland's landscapes, we need to have the markets that make this, that we can keep our forests and restore our forests to those native habitats at scale. And for most of my career, we've been losing markets, and it shows in what we're able to do. And you can look at all the public financing in the world, and it's not big enough to do this. We really need to be leaning in to some of these market-based solutions and directing it in a way that gets towards the kind of, outcomes and values that we want. So that's what this is about, and I'm open to friendly amendments. And we do have metrics that we can track some of the climate progress. Those would be by the carbon stored in the building materials. There's life cycle emissions. You really got to look at the whole life cycle approach and over the landscape to get an understanding of why this is a real value for climate. And we can relate it to acres of forest practices supported by the new markets. And that's part of the incentives to keep forests on the landscape. And it's one of our big.
Okay, so I hear, can't commit from Mike, but then a potential amendment, can't fully commit without Secretary Strickland.
Right.
But potential for amendment that we could work in that he suggested. So you'll work with me to get that.
I think there's a lot of mitigation in here too, right? So I think I want to tease out like the adaptation piece, because maybe it's a split, if you will, right? Where it's like the adaptation piece stays here and the mitigation piece, we go with the NWG, or talk to them about how we want to do that, since it is kind of both from a recommendation perspective. But yeah, because I don't want to, because we're not the mitigation work group, I don't want to put forward something without vetting it through them too, so.
Yeah, so Elliot Campbell's already commented on this, and there was a woody biomass recommendation that Jamie Raley with the Farm Bureau was trying to work with science and technical work group and mitigation work group on. I think there was understanding of the value of that, but they didn't choose it as their top 4. So, we're looking to sort of embody some of that interest in progress, like from the mitigation working group in this one. And for us, this is really about the forest condition. And, for me, that's some of the backbone of resilience, keeping our forests and having ways to be able to keep them in good forest health. So that's why one of the metrics would be this acres of practices for forest health.
And Mr. Mizrahi, did you have something?
No, I was just going to say, I sat in on the mitigation committee, and there was some pushback on this in the committee, and it did not rise to being a proposal there. So I don't think the idea of dividing it into 2, that it would move forward in mitigation at this point. Okay. So if there is a forestry reason to do it, then there's a forestry reason, but it didn't make it in mitigation otherwise.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, I think you'll work
Okay,
with
so
Mike.
we'll make some amendments based on what we heard. Okay. For the sake of time, we're going to keep us moving a little bit. This was submitted as a recommendation, MDA and Marbitco and DNR should identify leads to participate in an interagency work group that will be led by MDP to implement the rural economies planning and zoning tasks assigned to MDP in the next generation adaptation plan. So another item that would move forward, some work that has potentially not had movement from the next gen plan. So in order to make progress, putting that forward as an official recommendation charge.
So is the interagency group already there and working? We just need to identify leads, or is this not a word?
Not formed, to my knowledge.
Okay,
It would have to be formed.
okay. Because the way it's read, it just identify leads, like they're already doing it, we're just not participating. So that's right. The way it reads.
Yeah, we could reword that. Does the person who submitted this want to speak any more on that?
I will say that the recommendation came out of discussions that we've had in the past 6 months, maybe, about some of the recommendations that are in the next gen plan. And this was identified as a potential vehicle for us to get one of those recommendations moving forward. So yes, it's correct. This group does not exist. And MDP was looking for some more bodies to join us. How's that?
That sounds like a good charge to me. Okay. I am going to, Brandy, skip 7 if that's okay with you. We kind of discussed it. All right, I see your thumbs up, but I know we also had the last one pre-submitted was number 8. The Department of General Services with DNR and MDE should set up a pre-qualified multiple award contract for adaptation and resilience planning and for the design and construction of nature-based solution. Constitutes procurement measure carried out under the state's current contracting powers and will be carried out via a competitive request for proposals managed by DGF with the end date or the issued in FY27. Qualified contract is made available to local governments by FY28. Does the person who submitted that want to speak up a little bit on any context behind this?
I submitted this, a lot of this, like in terms of the timeline, were just guesses because you'd asked for it in the form, but really just the concept behind it is, can we have a joint procurement vehicle that local governments can use to get some of this work done? I know that on the mitigation side, DGS has provided that, and I think it's been useful to some of our local governments to be able to access that. And so on the resilience adaptation side, it'd be great if we can help streamline that process for them.
I think Leah had a
I am not a voting member, but I'm very supportive of this because it would help us in terms of the theme of today has been to increase capacity of our local governments and a lot of the opportunities that we offer at DNR, at specifically folks on climate resilience, are hard to implement when they don't have the staff capacity or the ability to contract quickly with practitioners that are able to produce that technical work. So I would just want to echo that this would be very valuable for a lot of the local governments that we work with in the climate resilience program. And I know that there may be models with other agencies that we could look at that have been able to employ this type of procurement method.
It seems like a great idea, but my sense of how the Climate Commission works is that somebody needs to be sure it's blessed by the Secretary of General Services before the meeting and that somebody is present at the meeting to bless it. And I don't know if that has happened or not, but whoever's proposal this is, I suggest you get this pre-blessed before the commission meeting.
We can, as the ARWG, send out an email to them, you know, on our behalf.
I think that's the right.
Yeah. And that's a good flag because nobody wants to assign things to somebody who, you know, hasn't seen it.
Thanks, Ryland.
Yes. With 1 minute left, any burning additional recommendations that anyone would like to speak to the group?
So were you putting mine inside of the financial one?
Yeah, I'll bucket it in there. The big financial one. And the one that you submitted in the chat, by the way, right?
The one I submitted in the chat.
Yes. Okay.
You know what, I would like to just add on to that because I don't think people understand how these taxing districts work. That essentially a community literally has to sign a petition where almost everyone in the community signs it to agree that their property taxes will pay back for the project. So if the state says, we have $1 million for your project and 0 interest loan, the community saves the interest. But if the state runs out of the $1 million and says, we have no money for your project, what it means is that the bank, which gives it a commercial loan, can then collect on the commercial loan through the tax instrument, which means the community still will save a substantial amount of money in interest payments because it's a safer collection. Essentially, the property is being held as collateral for paying back the loan. So you're bringing in a huge amount of non-government money to get resilience projects paid.
Very cool. I'm learning. Thank you.
So that's very different from the tax districts for the water, the ditches, tax ditches.
So I'm not familiar with that one. I just know this is for sure.
They get
shoreline only.
Yeah, they get a annual assessment that pays for maintaining its tax ditches that maintain the water flow.
Well, you might call it an assessment, you might call it a tax. Either way, it's an annual bill that each taxpayer in that district must pay until that amount of loan is paid.
Yes, thank you, and I will look at that. Okay, so passing it back to Secretary Hurd.
Great. Thank you all very much for that robust conversation. And Rylan will follow up the email with our ability to vote and the timeline and all those good things. With that, we're going to move to the public comment section. If you are a member of the public, we'll start in the room and then we'll go online. If you're online, please put your name in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you for public comment. I'll start in the room and then go online. Seeing as we have 3 minutes left, please try to keep your comments to 2 minutes or less. Any public comment in the room? Yes, Katie.
Kate Vogel with the National Wildlife Federation. Just want to put a plug that we're talking to some state agency folks and MAPSM about the climate-driven relocation work. And so if you'd like to be included on the calls or discussions, happy to add you. Right now, we're talking to folks from DNR, MDEM, MAPSM, and the Coastal States Organization, which helps coordinate across the ZM programs and helps facilitate the panel today. So yeah, looking into that and would love to coordinate with us.
Thank you, Kate. Any members of the public online that would like to make a comment? All right. If you are trying to unmute yourself, please feel free to continue to do so. I'm just going to move on to quick updates and then we'll double check with the online folks. Our next meeting is going to be November 18th. So we did move it up a week from our standard kind of meeting protocol so that we didn't have a conflict with the Thanksgiving holiday. And so that will be, again, November 18th from 2 to 4 in this room and a virtual room as well. Still not seeing any hands for public comment online. So with that, we'll wrap the meeting. So thank you all very much. And we will see you in November.
Yeah, thanks.